Welcome to the theater. Take a seat, grab some popcorn, and get ready for another horror movie double bill. This is Friday Night Fratricide.
Good evening, good evening. Welcome back to Friday Night Fratricide. It's another Friday. It's another time for us to watch some films. Because that's what we do on this podcast.
Yep.
We watch the films.
It's a horror movie podcast.
Sure is.
If you hadn't noticed.
Yeah. If you hadn't, I mean, what are you doing here? You didn't notice that?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Sort yourself out. I am Fraser.
And I am Ewan.
And we are the Happy Brothers. Here with an Exorcist special tonight in honor of the late William Friedkin, who sadly passed away last week.
Yep.
At the time of recording, it'll be a few weeks back by the time this episode comes out. But his influence on horror is timeless, so really we could do it at any point. It seemed apt to do it. Do it this time. So we've decided to spare you the horror. The literal horror that is Exorcist 2, The Heretic,
boy.
And have gone with the original, obviously, and Exorcist 3, which is a lot better than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
I had not seen it before.
I also hadn't seen it before, but I had heard nothing but good things about it.
Really?
So I was expecting it to be really good.
Oh, I'd heard bad things.
Had you heard bad things?
Well, I'd heard like sort of, it's fine kind of tales.
I had heard nothing but good things about it. So I was really excited to get into it and watch it, and I was like not disappointed.
Okay.
We'll get to that. We'll start with the first one.
We'll start with the original, yeah. We didn't really, because we picked them both between us, we didn't really have one. So do you want to take The Exorcist, or do you want to take Exorcist 3?
I really don't mind.
Which would you prefer?
I would prefer to take The Exorcist 3.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to go
I'll
first and take The Exorcist?
That suits me because I've seen it so many times now.
Okay, cool.
So, The Exorcist, 1974, directed by William Friedkin, based off the novel by William Peter Blatty, which was released a few years before, I think.
I'm not sure.
Not sure exactly when. I mean, it's a staple of horror, isn't it? At this point, it's one of those films that kind of, if you are into horror, you need to watch. You need to see it.
Yeah.
It is arguably the definitive horror film. It's one that I hadn't seen for quite a while. Like, I mean, I've been watching horror since early teens, and it was only in the last like 4 or 5 years that I watched it for the first time after hearing, it's the scariest film ever made. And I was like it's from the 70s. It's probably got like moments that would be scary in the 70s, but there's no way that it holds up. It absolutely holds up.
It does.
It's
still a very
without a doubt.
film.
It is still scary. It is still a masterpiece. It has aged incredibly well.
Yep.
For one that came out in the early 70s, like you're talking 5 years before Halloween.
Yeah.
6-7 years before Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Massacre. Like,
it was 73? 73?
This is 74.
Was it 74?
Yeah. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre was...
So same year.
Same year. But all the other sort of classics came a bit later. And it's just fantastic. It's just great. It's got an amazing cast.
Yep.
Great story. Great scares, great direction, great sound design. Something that I think we've spoken about before, I don't normally really consider unless it's actually noticeably good or bad.
Yeah.
The sound design won an Oscar.
Yeah.
For this. One of 2 Oscars. It won for Best Adapted Screenplay as well, I think.
Yeah.
Although it was nominated, there was loads of nominations.
Loads of nominations.
Actors, and Friedkin as well got directing nomination, I believe.
The one that I remember specifically reading about in my research was Best Supporting Actress for Linda Blair. Not surprisingly, but there was a whole thing about they were considering taking away her nomination because the actress that did the voice Mercedes McCambridge, wasn't credited in the film originally, and then her credit only came out after the film was released. So it was the whole thing that it's like they didn't know that Linda Blair's performance wasn't entirely her.
Yeah.
So they were considering sort of withdrawing the nomination. In the end, they didn't withdraw the nomination, but it was still like, it meant that she was never going to win it.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a shame, because she does a really good job.
She does. But they both do, to be fair.
They both do.
Like, honestly, they should have both been recognised.
Hearing some of the stuff, we can get into it a bit later on, but some of the stuff that Mercedes McCambridge did to do the voice is nuts. Like, proper commitment to acting that I have never heard of before.
Cool.
Like, insane.
I like
especially like voice acting. It's insane.
Yeah, so The Exorcist. It's not really about an exorcism, really, for the most part.
A lot of it.
We follow Chris McNeil and her daughter Reagan, played by Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair, respectively.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm just going to wait until you stop dying.
Yep.
You good?
Please do.
You want some water?
I'm good. I was choking on my own drink because I'm an idiot.
That's okay. I'll cut this bit out. Okay, Ewan has done. He's done finished choking on his juice. Yeah. So Chris McNeil and Reagan, her daughter, are in. Where's it set?
It's Georgetown. So I was a little confused because I thought Georgetown was its own like place. It's in Washington DC.
Washington. Okay.
It's like a neighborhood or like a sort of subset of Washington DC.
Yeah. So they're living there. Chris is an actress. They've moved into this house, moved away from somewhere else into Georgetown, stay for the sort of period of the film shoot. We get a few little shots near the start of the film with Chris actually filming. There's a big sort of protest scene that sideways introduces our other protagonist as well, Father Damien Karras, Doctor/Father Damien Karras.
Yeah,
as he's credited.
He's a psychiatrist as well.
He does have a doctorate, played by Jason Miller. Yeah, he plays a big part in the film as well. Both their stories are kind of tangential for maybe half the film, until they finally connect. He's dealing with his sickly mother, who eventually passes away, sort of losing his faith in the church, and then when he finally meets Reagan and Chris, it's kind of the lack of his belief versus his belief in what is happening to her, this possession that's happening to Reagan. And of course, Chris and Reagan are dealing with the possession, not knowing what's going on, and they go through, medical tests and everything. And it's a very slow burn film, but it never feels badly paced. Yeah, everything is earned throughout the film. Yeah, we start off with a lot of, the opening of the film is kind of almost a cold open. But it does eventually tie in. We see Father Merrin. It is Merrin, isn't it? Yeah. Played by Max von Sydow. Sydow? I don't. My pronunciation's not great here. Max von Sydow, who again, another fantastic addition to the cast. He's in Iraq doing like an archaeological dig, presumably just for like religious artifacts. Don't really know. And he finds this statuette of a demon that we later come to know as Pazuzu, which I can't take seriously after that episode of Futurama. Yeah. Pazuzu! The professor's dragon or his thing. Yeah. It's lucky that they never say his name out loud in the film. It's not until the second film that they actually say it out loud, so luckily it's easy enough to still take it seriously. It does, well, I don't know, man. That statue where he's got this massive stonker on him. Like, every time Pazuzu's in the film, as like the statue, he's just got this huge erection. Yep. Don't know why. He's a fictional demon as well, which I didn't quite appreciate. I thought he was like based off an actual religious like demon.
Is he not?
Nope, completely fictional.
Oh.
Like the fictional version is based on like an amalgamation of different demons, I guess.
There you go.
But Pazuzu itself is fictional. So they that was a conscious choice.
Yeah.
They decided to give him that big dong.
There you go.
And just rolled with it.
Yep.
But yeah, that kind of cold open, we're introduced to Father Merrin, and he has a... I thought it was a vision. I always thought it was a vision of the demon, but I think it is actually a statue of Pazuzu.
Like a big full-size statue.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And we don't really know what's happening, but then it segues into Chris and Reagan's story and Father Damien Karras' story. So for the first half of the film, it's very slowly building up to something. Reagan begins to act kind of strangely. She has like night terrors. They hear noises up in the attic, and she comes downstairs and is not feeling well, and she pees on the floor, which is very out of character. And then eventually, after her and Chris are in her bed, the bed starts to shake visibly, which Chris obviously realizes is it's not like a seizure she's having. She's not ill. There's something weird going on.
Yeah.
And that leads us to loads and loads of medical procedures. The scene with like the lengthy scene, the first medical procedure that Reagan goes into is it makes me clench my fists. It's got that like proper realism to it. Yeah. All these like syringes going in and blood in the veins.
Blood like squirts out, and
and what's really funny is when the film was marketed originally and subsequently reported on for being this terrifying film and people passing out and throwing up and all that, apparently the majority of it was because of the medical scene in the hospital. Which is so funny to me that they market it as like so scary you'll throw up on the floor, and really it's just people don't want to see like blood and operations going on.
Yeah.
So I always find that really funny. And yeah, things just get worse and worse until eventually Chris is introduced to Damien Karras, who at this point his mother has passed away, and he's kind of at a bit of a loss, doesn't know what to do with himself. As I say, he's losing his faith, and he eventually agrees to come and see Reagan and see what's up, see what needs done. And after getting a big old goop of pea soup all over his his best robe, he kind of realizes that there is something going on. But we get that whole like back and forward. Oh, is it is it real? Is it actually a possession? Is it blah blah blah? And then they eventually come down on the side of it is. I'm rushing through it a little bit. This is a long film. There's a lot of this, as I say, like slow burn narrative. Mm-hmm. Of kind of questioning what is actually going on. And
there's a bit that I always kind of forget about, and I always find really interesting when it comes up, is when Karras first goes and sees Reagan and kind of talks to her and whatever, and he gets holy water.
Yes.
So throw some holy water at her, and she starts screaming and shouting. And then when he goes downstairs, it's like, it was tap water. It wasn't even holy water. So he's at that point inclined to believe that it's not real, because he thinks that that's proof that it's being made up.
Yeah.
But of course, we in the audience know that it's not being made up. And we know what's going on.
When he leaves the house, he turns to Chris and he says, Did you know that my mother had recently passed away? Mm-hmm. And she says, like, yeah, I'm really sorry, blah, blah. And he's like, no, it's fine. Does Reagan know? She was like, no, how could she? And of course, when he was in the room with Reagan, she was like taunting him that his mother's in hell and blah blah blah. So it's this really great, like, Jason Miller does such a phenomenal job of playing this like skeptical religious figure. Yeah, I think he's phenomenal in it.
He's really great. So like he had acted a lot. I didn't realize that he was also a writer. He wrote for Broadway, like a playwright.
I think a lot of his stuff before
and
this was theatre.
It was all theatre. He had never. This was his first film role ever, which is really cool. And he knocks it out of the park. It's like absolutely. One of the best performances in horror ever. It's really great.
Yeah, he's great. So Chris eventually convinces him to do a bit more investigation. So he does like the classic recording the possessed Reagan speaking to him, and we go to the hospital. Not the hospital, go to the church, in the like psychiatric department, which I guess like is that part of the church? That confused me a little bit.
So I think it's partly
is it like a school?
Yeah, it's the
like a university kind of thing.
I don't know if you would necessarily call it a seminary, but it's like, or if it's just like a kind of religious school, a religious college or whatever, where Chris is filming, where this film's going on, is also where Karis works. And I don't know if it's just that it's like a big religious organization, and that's why there's like the church, and there's also
they have like the psychiatric department.
The psychiatric department. He is like the psychiatrist for all the other priests, because clearly they have enough priests to warrant having a staff psychiatrist.
But so he takes the tape there and they investigate, and I'm only bringing this up because it's important to the third film.
Yeah,
he takes it to one of the technicians, and the technician says no, and reverses the tape.
Yeah,
and plays it backwards, and obviously Reagan's speaking in reverse.
Yeah,
which I really love. I love that. Like, it's obviously been played out. Like we're now almost 50 years since the film came out, and things like that have been done so much since.
The whole playing death metal records backwards, and you can hear Satan's voice and stuff. This is where it came from. It's
so cool. Yeah,
you can see how influential it was. It's Father Dyer, who is one of the main characters, and he's like a minor character in this one. Yeah, and then comes back as one of the main characters in the next one. He's the one that's like,
oh, is it? I thought was it Dyer?
Yeah, it's Dyer. And he's like,
I thought it was another technician.
It's English, but it's backwards. And whatever. He was really good. Yeah, William O'Malley, who plays Father Dyer in the first one, he's recast for the third film when he comes back, was actually a priest.
And there was another one, wasn't there?
William O'Malley.
One of the other
priests. Yeah, may well have.
I can't remember his name.
I don't know.
But was actually a priest.
Yeah,
who got into acting. So where did I get to?
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. It's
recording.
Please interrupt with fun facts. The
recordings. It's English, but it's backwards.
Yeah, but he basically at this point, Karis is kind of like, right, I think we need to do an exorcism. I think something's going on. And just before this as well, we've had Reagan. We've had the director of Chris's film.
Yeah.
Fall, quote unquote, out the window, and so there's now this kind of homicide death investigation. We've got Detective Kinderman, who again plays quite a small part in this film, but is the main character in The Exorcist 3. He's kind of investigating as well, and kind of just ties all these things together. But we have Karis, who basically decides, I think we need to do an exorcism, and tries to convince the head priest. What do you call
Someone, I don't know.
Would it be a bishop? The bishop?
It could possibly
be Bishops
a bishop.
Have a different colour,
I guess.
Thing, do they not?
Potentially.
I don't know. I can't remember the names of the things either. What's the little collar called?
I don't know. People call it a dog collar.
No, there's name
like
for
just
it.
A priest collar. I don't
know. But he tries to convince the head of his church that they need it, and he kind of like, I'll think about it, and he contacts Father Merrin from the start.
Yeah.
So for the last last act of the film, I guess it's probably a little shorter than a third of the way to go, but it is the last act of the film. Is when it all goes down, when the exorcism finally happens.
Yeah.
We get Father Merrin and Father Karis teaming up to take on Pazuzu inside Reagan, and it's just it's so good, man.
It is really
this
great.
Whole sequence, like, the last, it's got to be the last 15-20 minutes of the film, are all in
25 minutes. Maybe.
Yeah, in Reagan's bedroom, them performing this, setting up and performing the exorcism, and we've got all the practical effects of Reagan lifting off the bed and the bed shaking and the head turning around and all the vomit everywhere and the smoke and the lights and the cold breath, and it's just fantastic. It's so good. Just them teaming up to save this girl, and there's just this, I don't know, it's not like scary in the traditional sense. There's no jump scares, or there's no real, like, from a film perspective it's not scary, but the horror is really like the idea of that actually happening is really like palpable when you're watching it. Like, this is a young girl who's dying from the inside out because of this otherworldly entity, and the two heroes are coming in to save her. There's, I don't know, there's something just really intense.
Oh, it's very intense.
About the whole last bit of the
it's
film.
Very well directed. Like, I think this is, we talked about William Friedkin not necessarily being particularly good to his cast. Like, he did some unpleasant things. There's a scene early on when Chris gets smacked across the room, and she was actually basically thrown against her will across the room, and she actually really injured herself.
Smacked her head against the floorboard.
And the scene when Reagan's convulsing on the bed and throwing around, they actually had like a sort of thing she was wired into that was causing her to throw herself back and forward, and actually caused Linda Blair like lifelong back problems,
got, like, scoliosis or something. Did she not, as
like,
a result of it?
I don't know what it is exactly, but like lifelong back problems. There was a whole, like, he used to like set guns off on the set. He would just like fire a gun into the air to startle the cast to get like authentic reactions.
I actually noticed when it was. I had never noticed it before, but it's the shot where Karras is listening back to the tape, the tape of Reagan in his apartment, or maybe it's in his office, and he's listening back to the tape, and the phone rings, and you can see the shot. He like sort of turns around, but you see it in his face. There's like a sort of jump, and then a spin. And I bet you that was one of the scenes.
Maybe, I don't know.
Where Friedkin's like unloading
apparently
into the ceiling.
He was not best pleased. Apparently, Jason Miller was like almost walked off set and like refused to come back.
Absolutely, sympathize.
And there's another example, but we'll get to that because it's something that happens right at the end of the film.
Okay. So yeah, the whole final scene is this big exorcism taking place. Father Merrin, it's a bit too much for him to bear. He exerts all of his mystical religious energy.
His heart gives out
trying to save Reagan, and he dies. The demon Pazuzu kind of takes credit for his death, but I think it is just he's old, and that's just he's done as much as he can. So we have this just Father Karras like final Hail Mary. Is that a pun?
I guess that's a Catholic thing.
It's a Catholic thing. Final Hail Mary, where he kind of like beats Reagan, in order to get.
He's properly going for it. He's like smacking her about.
And Pazuzu eventually like transfers into him, and then he jumps out the window to kill himself, freeing Reagan and kind of taking Pazuzu with him, and we get this pretty horrible sequence of presumably it wasn't Jason Miller, but Father Karras tumbling down these big steps behind the house and then like smacking his head off the concrete below, and then there's a big crowd forms and he bleeding out on the ground as he's absolved of his sins by Father Dyer. Father Dyer goes up and gives him one last blessing. And this is the last example of William Friedkin being incredibly horrible to his cast. You can see when he's blessing him, he does the makes the cross with his hand. You can see his hands properly shaking, and it's because apparently he wasn't giving a very convincing performance. Like I say, William O'Malley was a priest. Like, he wasn't a super experienced actor. I don't know how long he had been acting,
but he was like apparently not giving a convincing enough performance. He didn't look sad enough. And Friedkin walked up to him on stage, or like on set, and smacked him across the face, and then got him to do it again. And that's like the shot they have, and you can see his hands properly shaking, probably half shock and half rage at that point, because he's just been smacked across the face. Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to condone that behavior.
No.
But at the same time,
yeah,
the result that they got out of this film,
the results are undeniably incredible.
It's worth
don't
it,
think it's worth it.
Whether it's worth it at the extent of the cast's physical and mental well-being, is definitely more questionable.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the end. Reagan is healed. Her and Chris move away somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And all is well. Father Dyer sticks around. Him and Kinderman, I think, go and see a movie together.
Become friends,
become pals. Even though they've not interacted the entire film. They bond over Karras's sacrifice. And that's it. And then we get the tubular bells playing over the credits.
The last little bit.
Fun fact, before we get into opinions and any more things, fun fact about Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield's soundtrack of the film, we're talking about funky time signatures.
It does have a funky time signature.
Apparently, right, so I thought it was 1 bar of 7/8 and then 1 bar of 8/8 for 4/4.
Okay.
Because that's like uncommon, but not like super uncommon. Apparently, Mike Oldfield gave an interview where he says that the time signature is 15/8, which I have never heard before. And if any of you know your music time signatures, that's weird.
That would be, so one alternating between 7/8 and 8/8 would be 15/8.
Correct,
right?
Yes.
Okay.
So 1 bar of 7/8 and then 1 bar of 8/8 would be 1 big bar of 15/8.
Yeah.
But it's so weird that he described it as 15/8.
I don't know time signatures, but that is weird. I think the time signatures are notably weird because I think some people confuse this and the Halloween theme.
Yeah.
Because they both have the kind of weird time signature, the Halloween theme being in 5/4.
I don't know. I would need to hum it out in my head, I'm afraid.
And they have that kind of weirdness about them, and they're sort of, I guess, easily confused.
Yeah. But it's a fantastic soundtrack. It adds
great
to the
soundtrack.
Weirdness.
And the Tubular Bells, the album, is one of the best-selling albums of all time, possibly the best-selling album of all time, or something, or one of the. It
must be
for some reason.
The most is
I can't remember
or something.
It's there's some thing that it's super notable for, and I can't remember what it is.
That's a great album.
I want to say it's one of the best selling. I can't remember.
Yeah, but that is The Exorcist. There's just so much to love about this film.
There is.
Like, it's just really does have everything you want in a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary. It is phenomenally directed. The shot of Father Merrin getting out the taxi.
Yeah.
Arguably the most iconic shot in horror.
Just gorgeous.
Like him standing under the street light, looking up at the house.
There's the lights from the windows.
Like, even if you've not seen it, even if you've not heard of The Exorcist,
you've
probably seen this shot somewhere. It's just, it's phenomenal. And yeah, even like the sound, which I touched on briefly, but the sound, if you actually listen to the film and pay attention to how the sound is edited together, it works so well.
Mm-hmm.
You've got like these really loud, intense scenes when they need to be loud and intense and overwhelming, and then there's other scenes that are just complete silence.
Yeah.
That kind of just bring you out of it into this sense of security, but there's always this level of like unease.
Yeah.
Why is it so quiet? And later on in the film, like after you get more involved in the film, you're not really or at least I'm not really paying attention to it as much as I was at the start, but it's still there.
Yeah.
It's still there, like in the back of your mind, and it's just so good. It's just a fantastic film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Help me out here.
It is pretty great.
Losing my words.
There are so many little individual bits of like attention to detail that are really great. It's like the room, Reagan's bedroom, was air conditioned like right the way down. It was like a freezer.
Fridge,
they had like 3 separate AC units cooling it right the way down so that everyone's breath is visible all of the time. Apparently it got so cold that the condensation actually caused snow inside of the room.
That's insane.
Which is mad. Or like frost at least. Like visible like white layer of frost over everything, which is just insane. But that caused a bit of complication with the scenes when Reagan's head turns around. They obviously have like a dummy with a fake head on it because they're not just going to twist an actual actress's head right away.
Really?
So they actively rigged it so that it had visible breath, quote unquote breath as well, which is like, you probably wouldn't even think to look for that. No. You probably wouldn't even notice if it wasn't there, but it is there. That's the kind of attention to detail that they had when making this film. And it was like they took an entire day to film some scene fairly early on when they're having, in the McNeil household, they're having breakfast. And the guy, is it Frank, the German guy or the Swiss guy or whatever? Who's like
he's German, the caretaker, yeah.
He's like frying bacon. And they apparently spent an entire day doing this shot, getting a specific kind of bacon so that it wouldn't be too smoky and it wouldn't, or like you could still hear it and you could see it, but it wouldn't like pop too much or it wouldn't smoke too much or whatever. Like,
it's all these things. Like, it's
insane.
One of the scene I mentioned with Father Mern coming out of the taxi. Like, apparently they prepared that like 2 days. Like 2 full days, the team sat and prepared and planned out exactly how they're going to do this shot. The shot's like 10-20 seconds at most. But yeah, as you say, just that attention to detail, getting every little thing perfect, is such a lost art. I know it's such a pretentious thing to say, but it really is. Like,
this is like a big part of the reason that films are suffering now, is that they aren't given the time. Like, studios are so obsessed with just cranking the movies out as quickly as possible. They don't take the time to do stuff like this. And it means that you don't get, like, the lamppost shot from The Exorcist anymore. You don't get stuff like that anymore because it's just, you got to go with things being quick and easy and just, we'll just use CGI and we'll just fucking, we don't need to have an interesting shot. We'll just have the character say a dumb quip that we can stick in the trailer and people will still want to come and see the film. And it's like,
I was kind of thinking of comparisons to the likes of, particularly like Christopher Nolan. And if you think of like Oppenheimer, which granted I've not seen yet, but having read a lot about it, the approach that he takes, that Nolan takes to his films, is very reminiscent of this.
Yeah.
The long preparation, the practical effects, you know, his approach to giving actors time to prepare their role. And
like, what was that whole thing about on the set on Interstellar? Like, they actually grew all of the fields of corn.
Oh, the cornfields, yeah.
They actually grew all of it and then
bought and
farmed and sold all of it and made like millions of dollars purely off of the corn alone. Yeah.
But just again,
most people wouldn't bother to do that. Yeah. And obviously there are still some directors, talking about Christopher Nolan or someone like Martin Scorsese. You know, there are people like that are still paying this kind of attention to detail in films, but it's definitely not as common now.
No.
And I think William Friedkin definitely was one of those directors who really cared like that much, put that much effort in, made sure everything was as good as it possibly could be. And that's like why we want to, like, he might have been an arsehole, but that kind of creative integrity is something that isn't as common anymore. And I think that's, you know, really got to respect that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So before we do the ratings, I've got one last fun fact.
Okay.
And it's not very fun. And you've probably already heard it as well. But I want to repeat it for anyone who may be listening who does not know this fact.
Yeah.
About the curse of... Or no, tell you what. I'll briefly explain the curse of The Exorcist.
Okay.
And point you in the direction of Shudder's cursed film series. Yeah. Because they do a much better job. And it's a really entertaining series that they go over these films that were supposedly cursed. They do The Exorcist, they do... The Crow, they do...
The Omen? Is there a one?
The Omen, yes. Oh God, I can't remember the different films. There's 6 of them. There's a full series of them. And it's
there was a second season as well.
Was there? Oh, there was a second series, you're absolutely right. And it's amazing. It's really, really great series, really entertaining, really interesting. But the one that always sticks out to me is the fact that they had a serial killer on set.
Yeah.
In The Exorcist is such a, like... what the fuck moment when you're watching the film. The technician in the hospital scene when Reagan's getting her operation, getting all tests done.
Yeah.
The technician in the back of that scene was a man named Paul Bateson, who killed a journalist.
Yeah.
A couple of years after the film came out. It wasn't a homophobic attack, but it was he was targeted because he was gay. I think Paul Bateson was gay as well.
Right.
And it turned out that he confessed while in jail to committing the I think the bag murders they're called.
Bagman murders, maybe?
Bagman murders. Where there was a good number, I don't know how many exactly, a good number of young gay men in... Was it San Francisco? Am I imagining
it was in New York.
Was it in New York?
Or in and around New York.
Yeah, because it was the Hudson.
It was in the Hudson.
Yeah, they were murdered and their bodies were found in the Hudson River. And supposedly he confessed and gave details that no one else could know about these murders. And he's just cutting about in the background of The Exorcist.
There he is. In the film.
And it's, I don't know, it's not a fun fact, but it's one of those facts that's always like, you need to mention it. If you're talking about The Exorcist, it needs to be mentioned.
Something else. Not to just try and one-up your fact.
You're going to one-up
I'm going to try not serial killer. I'm not exactly. Something to add on to it that makes it a little bit more fun. Or not necessarily more fun. Something that makes it an extra little added layer of interest on top of it.
Yeah.
I don't know when the book was written, but there was another book by William Peter Blatty, which was called... I think it was called Tinker, Tailor, Killer, Kane.
Okay.
And it was adapted into the 9th configuration, which was another film that had a lot of the same cast as The Exorcist.
Okay.
You've got, the actor that played Karras is back in it, and I think the actor that played Father Dyer's in it as well, which is about a serial killer, about serial killings. And it was inspired by the Bagman murders.
Oh.
But I don't know if that was written before or after your man that was in The Exorcist confessed to the murders.
I don't know.
I would need to double check when it was written and that whole story, but it was apparently partly inspired by those murders.
Well, his confession was never confirmed.
Yeah.
It was he talked about it in jail, and people kind of take that as an actual confession, but it wasn't proper. But I think it was a good few years. It was after he was arrested and in jail, so it was like late 70s.
Okay,
if not well.
Because I think the film adaptation came out, I want to say 1980. So the book was probably kind of mid to late 70s.
Probably before or around the same time then as the book. But that's spooky. that's a bit spooky. Cool. So last thing to do is the ratings. We've gushed over this film enough.
Yep.
Do I need to ask?
Actually, yes.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not, because I was really close to giving it a 5. But there are two little gripes that I've got that stop me from giving it a perfect 5. One is I every time I watch the film, I get frustrated that there's a lack of tubular bells.
Yeah.
There's not enough,
definitely not in
right?
Enough.
Because it's maybe the best bit of soundtrack for any film ever made.
Yeah.
And I love it so much. And I'd listened to the past couple of weeks after watching this film and also The Exorcist 3, because it's in The Exorcist 3 for a little bit. I've just been listening to it. I've just been listening to Tubular Bells on a loop, basically, and it's just great, and I love it so much. And I actually timed how long it's in. It only plays for 40 seconds at the beginning of the film, and then again right at the very end. There's a scene in the middle when Karras and Dyer are out at lunch, and there's it's sort of play.
There's a little sting sort of in the back, not a sting.
Later,
but like
it's a bit later bit, so it's not the melody like the really famous Tubular Bells melody. It's a bit from like further on, because the Tubular Bells is about 25 minutes long.
It's a long
the song,
yeah.
But people only really know the first 3 or 4 minutes. But there's it's like a bit from like 20 minutes into the song or something that's playing over the background there, so a lot of people don't notice it. Anyway, the point is, there should be more of the Tubular Bells melody in the film.
Don't disagree.
There isn't enough, and it frustrates me a little bit. Also, I feel like it gets a little bit jumbled because you've got the plot with Merrin, the plot with Karras, and the plot with the McNeils. They all are they're sort of playing out simultaneously, but they don't overlap for quite a while, which I don't really have a problem with. But it means that there's a lot of cutting back and forward. And then, like, Father Merrin not being in the film for about an hour and a half. Like, he's in it right at the beginning, and then there's an hour and a half, and then he's in it again at the end. Kind of annoys me just a little bit. Just a little bit. It's like, there's nothing particularly significant about it. It's just a couple of things that bug me that mean that I can't quite give it a 5. I give it a 4.5.
Okay.
But I was very close to giving it a 5. I give it a 4.5.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I do disagree, though.
Yeah.
Not that the first point, Tubular Bells absolutely should be in it more.
Yeah.
Like, it should be just playing throughout the whole movie. But I disagree with the other part, because I actually kind of like that we get this cold open with Merrin.
Yeah.
And then for an hour plus, we don't see him again. And throughout the film, there's this kind of like nagging voice in the back of your head. Like, how is that related? What's going on?
Yeah.
And when he's reintroduced to the film, it's like, okay. And it kind of, don't know, it like closes this big gap. It's really satisfying to see him return. In my opinion, it's really satisfying to see him return back to the film. Yeah, and conclude it together.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I've already said everything I need to say. Like, I love it. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. It's an easy 5 out of 5 for me. Yeah, I've seen it probably half a dozen times since I watched it the first time a few years ago. Yeah. Every time it's amazing. This
was actually only my second watch.
Really?
Exorcist, yeah. I had seen it before, but it wasn't that long ago that I watched it for the first time. It was only a year or so ago that I watched it for the first time.
Okay.
But this is the kind of film that you can easily watch once a year.
Oh yeah.
Like, there are some films that it's like you watch it again too soon, and you kind of think like, I don't really want to be watching this again. Yeah. As good as it is, I don't really want to be watching it again too soon. The Exorcist one you can watch maybe a couple times a year. Just forever. Just keep watching it, because it's really great. And every time you watch it, there's an extra little thing that you pick up on it. And, you know,
this time for me, that it was the sound. I was listening. I had a quick read through like the synopsis and the Wikipedia page and stuff before I watched it, and noticed the Academy Award that they won was for sound editing or sound, or I can't remember what it was called at the time. But and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then as I was watching it, I was like, visibly
picking
trying
up
to
on all of it,
notice, and great, phenomenal film, amazing, well done, William Friedkin.
Very good.
You have left a untamperable mark on the history of horror cinema.
Yeah, Rippy Dippy.
Rippy Dippy. He's boogieing with Pazuzu now.
Yes, yeah.
He's probably like slagging off Pazuzu to his face.
Probably.
He's just ripping into him.
Just ripping into him. I don't give a shit what you think, stupid fucking Babylonian idiot.
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah.
Oh, poor guy. Right, okay. Do you want to take us through The Exorcist 3 or Legion?
Yes.
Or William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist 3 or whatever title it's called?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I should have double checked before we started recording. Did you watch the theatrical cut or did you watch the director's cut?
Oh, I don't know.
Did you watch? If you don't know, it was probably theatrical cut.
What's the difference?
There are a couple. The ending's very different,
Okay.
And there are a couple of scenes that were added into the director's cut. But like all of those scenes, the footage was lost for a long time, so they're not in HD.
All right,
They're like 4:3 super scratchy looking footage.
Oh, I didn't notice anything like that. So.
You would definitely have noticed if you watched the director's cut.
So
I did watch the theatrical cut, but then I went back and I watched just to see the ending, because I'll get to the ending. I don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so The Exorcist 3 carries on a couple of the characters from the first film. You've got Lieutenant Kinderman, now played by George C. Scott.
Yep.
The wonderful George C. Scott. We've got Father Dyer is back. Again, has been recast.
Played by Ed Flanders this time.
Played by Ed Flanders. Thank you. I was just about to look up who it was.
I got the main cast.
He's got the main cast there. And he's also really good. So the plot follows Kinderman investigating a series of murders. It's not really about exorcisms for a long time in this film.
In similar to the first film, in that
fact,
respect.
There was not an exorcism at all in the original plan for this film. And then they were like, hey, it's a sequel to The Exorcist. If we're going to call it The Exorcist 3, you need to put an exorcism in it. And that's why the director's cut ending is so different. The director's cut ending is just, there's just not an exorcism.
Well, that's the thing, because it's based on William Peter Blatty's book called Legion.
Yeah.
Which is like it does follow roughly the same plot, but as you say, it's not the Exorcist sequel. It's another book in the world.
In the same world, it's kind of got a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same ideas. It's exploring the same concepts, and with this kind of Catholicism and all that, and it's carrying on, like I say, the two kind of main characters. So yeah, we're following Kinderman as he's going about, he's investigating these murders. The first one that we don't see the murder, but we see him investigating the murder. There was a young boy was killed and beheaded, which is pretty grisly.
Yep. It gets grislier as well.
It does get grislier. He is looking into this. He's clearly quite bummed out about it. He goes to see Dyer. It obviously then starts to explore the fact that they've been friends for like 15 years since the events of the first film. They go out to the cinema together to go and see It's a Wonderful Life. They're just, hanging out and having a good time. Kinderman has this little speech where he talks about how his mother-in-law's visiting and she's keeping a live carp in the bathtub. And there's something about it that's so funny, because George C. Scott's a very serious actor, and he's totally deadpan, totally straight-faced, but he's giving this weird monologue about how there's a carp in his bathtub, and he hates it and he can't stand the sight of it. The whole time, Father Dyer is just cracking up. They're standing really close together, and he's just fucking peeling himself, laughing.
I will say, there's this like real like buddy cop element.
Yeah, there is.
In the first like 20 minutes of the film, between Dyer and Kinderman, there's this real, I don't know, bromance to it that I really, really liked.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I expected at all. But as you say, this sort of like dry humor in contrast to these like grisly murders was setting up to be like a really interesting film.
Yeah.
It doesn't last, unfortunately. But
okay. There you go. So yeah, the murder investigations continue. We do wind up seeing the murder of a priest.
Yeah.
There's another priest who, while he's sitting, he's taking confession with this old woman, and she starts talking about how like she is by nature very guilty, and she feels the need to confess everything that she does, which is very Catholic, I suppose. And she's talking about how she feels the need to confess everything, and she's like, "Oh, I've got 92 sins to confess, Father." And he's like, "Oh God, here we go." And then she's just like, "First up, murder." And he goes, "Oh, okay, what? Hang on." And then the next thing that we see basically is them. They're in the church. They're investigating. He's been murdered, and at this point they find out that what the killer has been doing is injecting the victims with a drug that paralyzes them. It's a drug that's used in for like electroshock therapy. I can't remember the name of the drug, but it's used kind of in small doses to sort of stop people.
Scopolamine. scopolamine.
I don't know,
something like that.
But used in enough doses, it basically paralyzes people, and they are so totally aware of their own body, and they still feel pain, but they're unable to do anything about it, which is horrifying.
Used in a perfect dose.
A perfect dose.
Because it needs to be...
not too much.
If they use too little, it has no effect. And if they use too much, it'll kill them instantly.
Yeah.
So it has to be
exactly the right amount. Yeah.
Which is important.
So he's, of course, that whole concept is terrifying.
Yeah.
They are looking into they're investigating, they're like taking the fingerprints. They take the fingerprints on the inside of the sliding door of the confessional, because they realize that the killer must have closed the door, like reached around and closed the door. And they've already got a set of prints from the first murder, or the previous murder that we saw at the beginning of the film. And he's like, oh, of course. So the fingerprints there match the fingerprints from the first murder, right? And everyone's like, no, they don't. They don't match. And he's clearly really confused, because so there's like, there are multiple killers, but they're doing the exact same thing. It's clearly the same person. We can tell from their MO, from their habits, whatever, but they have different fingerprints of what's going on. And this is when it starts to tie in this supernatural element that, like, oh, maybe it's sort of a possession. It's like a demon's possessing multiple people in order to commit these murders. But again, we don't really know what's going on there. At this point, Father Dyer's in the hospital. It's not anything particularly serious. He's just kind of getting some tests done and being kept under observation or whatever. But he's in this hospital for a little while, and then Kinderman gets the call that there's been another murder, and he goes in, and it's Dyer that's been killed. And someone has written in his blood above his bed, "It's a Wonderful Life," which of course then brings this whole personal element into it, because that was a film that they had seen, and he's totally devastated. This is his best friend, and they have the body's there. The body's been decapitated. Again, we don't see any of it, but the body's been decapitated, and there's all of these little specimen jars full of blood sitting on the table, and they find out that he was exsanguinated. That's the word. That's the word. He was killed by all of the blood being drained out of him. Or he might have been killed before that. But no, because he was killed before the head was cut off.
Yeah.
So he was killed by being exsanguinated.
So basically,
and then
paralyzed
his head was cut off
as all the blood is sucked out your body.
Really grisly,
really horrific
method of murder.
Yeah.
I don't know what is William Peter Blatty's fucking problem was. I don't know what this guy's damage was, but he wrote some fucked up murders.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So then we started getting this whole thing that it's Kinderman, at least, is convinced that there is a connection here with the Gemini murders, which were some murders that happened previously, because all of the publications, all of the journalism and all the articles in the newspaper talking about it described it wrong on purpose. They would say that it was a finger was cut off from the victim's left hand, and there was a symbol, the Gemini, like the twins symbol, was carved into their back.
Yeah.
But it was actually a finger was from their right hand, and the symbol was carved into their left hand, the palm of their left hand, or something like that. I might be getting
something like
whatever.
That. Yeah.
The point is that it's like slightly different from what it was, but these murders, it's like the symbol, the Gemini symbol, was carved into the correct hand.
Yeah.
So now he's convinced that this is something going
on. Not a copycat or anything like that.
It's the original Gemini killer, but the Gemini killer is dead. He was killed. He got the death penalty and he died. So we don't know what's going on. So then a lot of this is then set sort of in and around the hospital, because we're exploring the fact that Dyer was killed. So he starts asking, there's a woman that was the last eyewitness, who is an elderly woman who is clearly not all there mentally. And Kinderman's kind of trying to get her to give him some information, but she's not giving anything up, either because she genuinely doesn't remember anything, or she's just too far gone to remember, or whatever. It's quite distressing. All of these people are hanging around and kind of older people.
A little bit bleak, but
yeah.
The inevitability of
it's
old age and
very
death is...
And then he starts going around and he has a look, and there's like a kind of solitary, I guess. There's these
solitary confinement, I guess.
Yeah, for dangerous patients that are being held. And he goes in, and one of the patients there, who's referred to as Patient X because they don't know who it is Father Karras. Which again doesn't make an awful lot of sense because he died 15 years ago.
Yep.
But then there's this whole thing that he clawed his way out of the grave because he was still possessed, or it took the demon kind of possessed him back, and he climbed his way out of the grave and then got found and taken into the hospital and this whole thing. And then we start to cut back and forth between Karras and the Gemini killer, who's played by Brad Dourif. Absolutely fantastic. Like,
I've got a whole big thing about Brad Dourif at the end, so I'll get to that.
Okay, we'll get to that, but like, he's amazing. He's so good. And he gives all these monologues. There's a lot of monologues in this film.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Which I thought was really interesting. I personally quite liked it. I can see people not liking that about the film because it's quite wordy. But I really liked it because I think it shows that it's like, this is what a film directed by an author would be like. It makes so much sense that William Peter Blatty was like, he wrote a book that was just like words, and then he adapted that his way into a film. So it's got all of these great monologues in it.
So my two favorite scenes in the whole film were the first scene with Father Karras, like Jason Miller and George C. Scott in the cell.
Yeah.
And my second favorite scene was the one with Brad Dourif and George C. Scott in the cell together. Like, they're all such phenomenal actors. All three of them. Like, I would argue that Jason Miller's performance in this one is better than the Exorcist.
Very possibly.
Like, there's something about the sort of just how sinister he is.
He's very,
and his voice is a lot deeper. And
he looks awful.
Yeah, he looks.
He's like
pretty rough,
beaten up, and his eyes are all sunken and kind of discolored, and he just looks terrible, absolutely dour.
But just, and as you say, all these monologues of him describing how he escaped hell, basically, it's just. I was hooked.
Yeah,
like it's been a while since I've been like
grabbed staring at the screen.
Yeah, totally involved in this.
Yeah,
the rest of the film didn't keep my attention. But anyway, that's not the point. We'll get to that.
There was also I'm just looking over my notes, and there was actually one scene that I wanted to mention just before we got to this, where Kinderman goes to he goes into a church and he's talking with a priest about this kind of the murder of the priest that I mentioned previously. I think this is before we find out that Dyer's been killed. Or this is just after we find out that Dyer's been killed. And he's kind of just going up and down, and he's chatting, and we get all of these shots around the church, and we see there's a statue of like a saint. It's just sort of stood next to the doorway. And then a little bit later, it cuts back to the length of this hallway that you see George C. Scott's about to walk down. But the statue on kind of the right side of the thing now has this horrible big like grin. It has this like twisted grin, and he's holding a knife in his hand. And it just like, it cuts to it and you don't even notice it at first, and then you see it and it's really scary. It's really unsettling that something that looks like that would be in a church. It's really gross. And then he goes down, and there's the kind of like a cop-out jump scare where there's like a woman that was sort of, she's just locking up or whatever, and she sort of startles him. And anyway, going back to it, but like, I wanted to mention that because I love that scene when we get that statue. We've got all the great big long monologues with Brad Dourif and with Jason Miller, and it's great. We then get this scene, which is probably the scene that I knew most about. I think it was the only bit of the film that I had seen before. It was in Shudder's 101 Scariest Movie Moments.
It's one of the more iconic.
Very well deserved.
Scares.
This was my favorite bit in the film, and I honestly, I wrote that it is just a masterclass in horror filmmaking. It's so well done. Everyone talks about how this is just like one of the best horror scenes ever, and it really is. It's in the hospital late at night. There's so it's like across from where Dyer's room was. So obviously kind of on high alert. There's a couple of cops that are sort of milling around. We see them coming in and out. There's a nurse by herself on duty. It's just her. She's kind of doing some paperwork or whatever, and she starts hearing noises coming from one of the rooms, and she kind of goes to investigate. She goes into the room. We get this scare that it's just a patient, but it's like a bit of a sort of fake out. There's this patient had like a glass of ice water that was cracking, and that's what the noise was. And he gets startled and wakes up and screams, and then she screams, and then they kind of go back and forward, and then the nurse goes back out of the room and starts to close things down and turn the lights off, and she goes back down. And at this point, like, the cop comes back in, so you're at rest because you're like, oh, it's fine, there's a cop there.
Yeah.
Oh, nothing bad could happen if a cop was there, right?
Every time
cops get mentioned, I got to mention how much I hate cops. But like, there's that from a filmmaking perspective.
No, yeah, I know exactly.
You see it and you're like,
yeah.
There is someone else there. Nothing bad is going to happen, so you're kind of put at ease. But then another cop comes in and starts talking to him, and then the two of them leave, and then he comes back in and he picks up his hat and he goes back out again. All the while, the nurse is kind of going in and out of the patients' rooms and turning the lights off, and she goes back to the room. And then as she's going back to the nurse's station, she just walks like kind of lengthways across the corridor, and then suddenly this figure steps out wearing this like full white robes, covering the body with like shears.
The big they use autopsy shears.
Steps out and kind of like lunges with the shears towards her neck, and there's this sort of shrieking noise, and it zooms in, and then immediate hard cut to a statue of Jesus that's been decapitated.
Yeah.
And it's just, go and watch it.
It's incredible.
I don't care if you've seen the film before. I don't care if you're going to watch the film in the future and you don't want to be spoiled. It's not really like spoiling anything to watch this clip out of context.
Yeah.
Really. Especially not if you're listening to this and I've already explained the plot of the film anyway. Go and like find that 4-minute long clip on YouTube and fucking watch it, because it's honestly, it's incredible.
The whole thing as well is
amazing.
Like, see, when they talk about it in Shudder's documentaries and stuff, they talk about this jump scare and they say like how great it is, and you know, you show little clips from it, but they never show the full length of the clip. Yeah. The clip is like 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
There is all of this tension and build up before this jump scare, and then the cutaway as well. And as you say, with the other characters, like the cops coming in and out, it builds up this huge amount of tension. Yeah. And for William Peter Blatty, who, to my knowledge, isn't a director.
No. He had, like I said, the Ninth Configuration. Yeah. That was the only other film that he had directed. Yeah. So that was early 80s, maybe 1980. And then he did this, and that was it. Beyond that, he had only written.
For a non-director to pull off a scene like that.
Honestly incredible.
It's amazing.
It's
absolutely
really fantastic.
Incredible.
So, yeah, just masterclass in filmmaking. I honestly, like, the note that I made at that point was just, fuck me. Like, I was just blown away.
It's so good.
Even having seen it before, it's honestly just incredible.
Yeah. Well, I'd never seen the whole thing. That's kind of what I was saying. Like, I'd only ever seen, like, the actual final jump scare bit and then clips about it, but I'd never sat down and watched.
You just watch
the whole sequence.
And it's really
so good.
Incredible. So good. Yeah, and then we get some more monologues with Brad Dourif and George C. Scott, kind of going back and forward. This is the point where I was really starting to notice the whole thing about like Blatty being a novelist and then turning to directing, like turning to screenwriting and directing. And obviously it's such a shift in medium from going like just words into like this visual medium, but he just nails it. He
pulls
knocks
it
out of the park. It's so good.
Absolutely.
And then we kind of get into the last little bit of this film. There's a very tense scene when Kinderman realizes that the killer, that Gemini is talking about kind of jumping into the bodies and committing all of these murders. He kind of makes a comment about like, I'm going to go and kill your family. Or he doesn't say it in so many words, but Kinderman realizes that that's what's going to happen. We get it's done really well because they don't really spell it out too much, but you see Kinderman is on the phone trying to phone his family, but they're not picking up. And then it cuts to his family and they're already on the phone with him. And he's saying over the phone, like, oh, there's a nurse that's coming by that's going to drop something off for you. She'll be there in like 10 minutes. All right, okay, bye. But of course, because it's cutting back and forward between the two of them, we know it's not the real Kinderman. And it's that bit of the dramatic irony where the audience knows something that the characters don't, and it just adds, it's
a great bit of tension.
It's good.
And he kind of races.
It's done well. And he's like bombing down towards the house, and we see the nurse just sitting with this kind of blank stare in the back of a taxi. So we know that she's going off to go and kill them. And he's bombing along in this police car trying to catch up with them. And it's very tense. And then they have this kind of confrontation. He goes to the house and the nurse is just sitting there in the house. It was like, apparently she showed up and immediately fainted. So Kinderman's wife was like, come and sit down and I'll make you a cup of tea and whatever. And she's just sitting, staring at the kitchen table until Kinderman comes in. And that's the point when she reaches into her handbag and pulls these shears out and lunges at Kinderman's daughter. And the scene overall isn't poorly made. I didn't love it.
It's a bit dramatic.
It tonally feels very different from the rest of the film, which bothered me a little bit. It's just a bit too actiony.
Yeah,
it's a bit too much like a cop drama.
Yeah,
and I know that the film so far has been. So it's had, because it's investigating murders, it has a lot more of that kind of crime procedural aspect to it rather than a standard horror film. But it still feels a little bit Starsky and Hutch. The like racing down the streets and it's a bit.
Well, see, that I don't mind. The tension up until the scene I don't mind. Yeah. But it's the actual, like, the brawl. Yeah. Trying to get this old lady away from his daughter. And then there's the other... It's not Kinderman. There's another cop there.
There's another cop there, yeah.
She, like, pushes him and he goes absolutely flying the length of the room and crashes into the wall. And it's like, this is a...
Yeah.
It's just a bit much.
Yeah. I didn't love that. I think this was basically the first bit in the film that I didn't love.
Really?
Like, I really loved the film up until this point. This is the first bit where I was kind of like, that's disappointing. It's a bit of a... Because it just drops down a little bit. And then we get this final scene, which is very well done, where we've got a character who has been mentioned and is set up earlier in the film, but hasn't really been in it up to this point. Another priest called Father Morning, who has conducted an exorcism in the past. And we kind of get some shots of him briefly throughout the film, some sort of spooky things happening, like his bird dies. He's got a bird in his windowsill. It just dies suddenly, and there's a crucifix on the wall that falls, and then the little Jesus on it starts crying blood.
Oh, Jesus. Little Jesus.
The little boy Jesus. So, yeah, there you go. That happens. And then, so then we get this final scene with Morning doing this exorcism, and he goes and he tries to exorcise Karis, I guess. And it keeps cutting back and forward between Jason Miller as Karis and Brad Dourif as the Gemini Killer. But he goes to conduct this exorcism. It doesn't really work. He sort of gets thrown around the room and he gets pinned against the ceiling, and it's very gnarly.
Apart as well. The practical effects here.
His skin gets stuck to the ceiling, and then he sort of peels off and he gets kind of flayed. It's very gnarly. And then George C. Scott shows up. He rushes back. Kinderman comes in, and then they get this final confrontation. Kinderman then similarly gets thrown against the wall, and he has this whole big speech where he's talking about like what he believes in, because he didn't really believe in demons or God, but he's going on about like, I believe in evil and murder and injustice and whatever. And it's very good. Again, very well written monologue. Very well written monologue, and he carries it off very well. And then this very big, tense, dramatic scene basically concludes with him pleading with Karis to fight the possession. Karis just manages to regain control of his body long enough to plead for Kinderman to kill him, and Kinderman shoots him, and that's it.
Yeah,
and that's the end of the film. Basically, he shoots him, and he drops down, and then Kinderman gets up and sort of puts the gun against his head, and then we hear the gunshot, and it cuts, basically to the end credits.
That's it.
That's the end of the film.
No coming back from that one.
Yeah,
a fall down the little tumble down the
tumble
stairs.
down the stairs. You can survive.
He's fine.
Gunshot to the head, not so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, that scene as well I didn't love the exorcism.
Really?
Very, very well done, but I think it's quite obvious that it was tacked on because it wasn't in the original script and wasn't in the book.
Yeah.
This is actually the reason I went back and watched I didn't watch all of the director's cut because it is mostly the same, but I went back and kind of flicked through the director's cut to see all the different bits. And the ending is very, very different. Basically, after the stuff in Kinderman's house, he goes back to the ward where Karis is. He kind of walks into the room and they don't have like dialogue. He just walks in and he says like, "Pray for me, Karis," and then he takes his gun out and he shoots him. Just like gangland style execution, just shoots him in the head, and that's the end of the film. Like, there's no exorcism at the end. He just kills Karis. He kills the possessed Karis, and that's the end of it. And I don't know if I necessarily preferred that, but I think that fit better with the tone of the film kind of so far. Whereas I felt the exorcism was a bit much. So for a film that was generally quite grounded so far, to have there's a whole, like, the ground cracks and there's like lightning striking in the room, and we see all of the victims of the Gemini killer come up out of the ground, and there's the boy that gets killed at the start. It's like crucified, and it's a little bit much. And I thought tonally just a little bit off from what the rest of the film was like, which bothered me a little bit.
But then the one thing with that is the reason that the old woman doesn't kill Kinnaman's daughter is because Morning shows up and starts the exorcism.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, if they'd reworked that a little bit, if they fight off, if they have to kill the old woman or something, and then there's a moment of like, my daughter's safe, but I had to kill this old woman.
Yeah.
Now I am conflicted and sad, and this must be stopped.
This has to end now.
Yeah, and then he goes and kills. Then I get it. But
yeah, I think that's basically what happens in the director's cut.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. Yeah. There you go. That's the film. That's the Exorcist 3.
That's a film, all right.
What did you think of it? So you were a little bit disappointed in places, or?
No, I was probably pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I had you've got The Exorcist. That it's The Exorcist. It's the horror film, and hearing that there's sequels about it, you're always going to be like, eh.
Yeah.
And obviously, Exorcist 2 is supposedly like one of the worst films ever made. It's like absolute garbage. Whereas The Exorcist 3 is kind of like, it's kind of like one of those films where some people love it, some people hate it. So I was kind of like, okay, so it's going to be a kind of middle of the road, bits that I like, bits that I don't like. And it was, but I think it was more in favor of bits that I liked.
Right.
And overall, I kind of quite enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad that Father Dyer got killed so early on in the film.
Mm-hmm.
That bugged me, because it doesn't feel like we've had long enough with him and Kinderman to actually, like, from that point, it's like 20 minutes into the film. From that's the point where Kinderman's like, right, I need to figure out what's going on here. My friend's been killed. But I was kind of like, I don't feel it.
You don't.
We've not had enough of the two of them. Like, we've had a couple of nice scenes, like them in the diner is really fun, and Kinderman coming to see him and bringing him a stuffed toy in the hospital. That's nice, but I wanted more of that, and I wanted more of the two of them, trying to, like, battling the real life detective angle and the Catholic religious angle of these murders, and kind of buddy copying it, trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah. And then even if Dyer had been killed, like, later on, and that kind of kicks off the third act of like Kinderman getting revenge, I think that would have been a much better film.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, we have like this huge portion in the middle of the film of Kinderman investigating that I just didn't enjoy at all. I just thought it was really boring, and I didn't vibe with it at all. That's the bit that kind of drew it down. But
sort of between Dyer's death and Karis coming back,
pretty much,
yeah.
And then even after we meet Karis again, there's still a good few scenes before we get to like the last act with the hallway jump scare and Kinderman's house and the final showdown. There's still a wee bit in there that's kind of like, I don't know. There's the whole subplot with the head of psychiatry, Dr. Temple.
It's a bit weird.
Played by, I did write it down somewhere. Oh my god, I made so many notes that I've not said. Scott Wilson.
Yeah.
From The Walking Dead.
Yeah. Was it Herschel from The Walking Dead?
Herschel from The Walking Dead, who's amazing. It sadly passed away now, but he's amazing. He's not great in this because he's not really got much to do.
Yeah, he was pretty good.
But as an actor, I really like him. And yeah, that whole, like, it just, I don't know, I didn't really understand what his whole deal was. He kills himself because he feels guilty
about something.
Something.
He was up to something. I didn't really
really
explain
get what was going on. Really strange. So that whole stuff didn't really play out. But the scenes with Jason Miller is absolutely phenomenal. Like, I honestly think I preferred his performance here to the first film. It's just him versus George C. Scott.
Yeah,
it's just like two powerhouses.
Yeah,
giving these huge long dialogues. It is amazing. And Brad Dourif. So my fun fact about Brad Dourif, which you might already know.
Right, maybe.
This was 1990. This came out. In 1990, I want to say 3, but possibly 1994, Brad Dourif stars in my favourite episode of The X-Files.
Oh, yeah.
Of all time.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. He's the psychic serial killer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He plays a serial killer called Luther Lee Boggs, which is, the name's based on real-life serial killers. And if you've seen the X-Files, even if you've not seen the X-Files, you know Mulder and Scully. So Mulder is in this is like, he plays the skeptic compared to when he normally doesn't. And Scully is kind of, her father's died, and is kind of, she believes the serial killer in that he has these psychic abilities, and he's trying to wrangle his way off of death row in order to help solve this other murder. And for the majority of the episode, he's locked up, but there's big portions where he plays this serial killer on death row, giving a very similar performance to what he gives in The Exorcist 3. Very, like, long monologues. He's talking about these psychic abilities. He's very intense. He gives a lot of eye contact in Exorcist 3, whereas in X-Files, he's very, like, looking all over the place. But they're very, very similar performances, and it's one of my absolute favourite episodes of The X-Files, if not my favourite.
Yeah.
So when he shows up in this, giving a very, very similar performance, chef's kiss.
Right up your street.
Absolutely phenomenal. Like, I would have given him an Oscar nom for this.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think his performance in this is better than anyone in the first Exorcist film.
Yeah, I would agree.
He's just absolutely incredible. So any scene that he or Jason Miller are in, amazing. I love the whole... I actually quite like the scene at the end. Like, yes, you're not wrong. The exorcism does kind of come out of nowhere. Like, Father Morning just shows up
He's just
with
there.
his garbs. He's just like... It's
a
beautiful day for an exorcism. And just starts. But I kind of like that scene. I like the conclusion of the film and sort of Karis finally getting his payback. The demons, held him captive for 15 years, and he finally gets to put him to rest.
Yeah.
So I really liked it. I've rambled a lot. Basically, I liked it a lot more than I thought. I gave it 3.5 stars.
3.5.
I thought there was a lot to love. There was a lot I didn't love, but the stuff that I did love was so good that it kind of balanced out quite nicely.
Yeah, cool.
I'll stop talking now.
No, fair enough. Very good. I was actually, like I said with the Exorcist 1, it's very, very close to giving it 5 stars, but I just didn't quite give it 5 stars. So I gave it 4.5, but it's a very, very high 4.5. It was almost a 5. The Exorcist 3, I was basically the same. I was like, it's not quite a 5. Basically the ending tonally being so different to the most of the film so far, bugged me just enough that I docked it a 0.5 star.
Really?
And I'm giving
it was a close 5.
And I'm giving it 4.5.
Okay.
I think I maybe prefer The Exorcist 3 to The Exorcist 1.
Really?
But
that's a statement.
But there's really not much in it. I think they're both phenomenal films for very different reasons, but also they're so similar in so many ways. They're so different, but they're so similar. You know what I mean? There's like
yeah.
It's just, and yeah, they're both incredible. Like the directing is just spot on. Like the cinematography is just cracking the whole way
good,
through. Yeah. The acting is amazing. You got some great performances from everybody involved.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, everyone.
The writing is amazing, like both in terms of the way that the plot unfolds and the dialogue. It's just, yeah, cracking. Really, just a fantastic film.
As I say, right, there are areas that I think could make it as good as in my opinion, as good as The Exorcist. I know you may feel differently. That's fair enough. But for me, it doesn't live up to the original. However, if they had focused on, as I say, like the duo of Dyer and Kinderman, focused on that, had it be more a detective story, buddy, with the sort of dry black humor throughout, and then we still had all the same kills, all the same plot, but Dyer gets killed later on in the film, which leads Kinderman to get his revenge later on. And if we'd had the original cinematic, the director's cut ending, with more of a focus being the sort of race to Kinderman's house and him saving his daughter as the sort of climax, and then him killing Karis as like the epilogue almost. Yeah, I think you'd have a pretty near perfect film. So as good as The Exorcist, but different. Yeah. Whereas The Exorcist is more of a supernatural horror, this would be more a thriller horror.
Yeah. Yeah. You could draw similarities between this and something like Seven. Where it's like that, like,
or Zodiac,
that like detective-y. Well, there you go. Gemini. The Gemini killings are inspired by the Zodiac killer. Yeah. You should. Yeah, I think that detective-y, thriller-y, very, very dark, almost like neo-noir kind of story. Yeah.
I'm glad you liked it though.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
So The Exorcist 3, Legion. Yeah. William Peter Blatty. William Friedkin had, I think, a little bit of a hand in helping to make it, but he and Blatty had quite a few arguments during development.
They didn't talk to each other for several years after the first film. Yeah. Then they reconciled their differences and they started working together on... It was after The Exorcist 2 came out. They started working together on a script for a new Exorcist sequel. When Friedkin dropped out, Blatty turned that into a book, which was Legion. And then that was adapted into this film. By this point, Friedkin didn't want to come back to do the film, so Blatty was like, I'm going to do it myself. Oh, actually, fun fact that I read on IMDb, a good one. You know who they originally pegged to direct?
I did, because I looked it up. Oh. Sorry.
John Carpenter.
Yep.
They originally pegged John Carpenter to direct, and he was on board. He was going to do it. And then apparently as soon as he kind of met with Blatty and was just like talking about what they were going to do, he was like, nah, I think you want to direct this yourself and I think you should go for it.
Yeah.
And then he dropped out and then Blatty directed it himself and there you go. It's great.
I maybe a controversial opinion, but I don't think John Carpenter would have done as good a job.
No. At this point,
I think because it's less supernatural.
Yeah.
I think he would. If it had been more of an Exorcist-y film, I think he might have done something interesting with it. But because it's more of a cop thriller, with supernatural elements, yeah.
You know, I love my Carpenter. Some of my favorite films are John Carpenter films, but by 1990,
also
he wasn't putting out his best work.
No.
So I am quite glad that this wasn't directed by John Carpenter. Yeah. I got to be honest. Sorry, John, but
we love you.
We do.
Yeah, but it's. I was going to say something. Or what I was going to say.
I don't know.
Maybe I was going to say something. Yeah. Oh, I was going to tie it back to the whole thing that we're honoring William Friedkin.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had less input in this film. There were elements of his contribution, I guess. And I think they became friends again after this.
Yeah,
was complete.
They seem to
reconcile again.
Yeah,
and do conventions and stuff. But yeah, just what a team, Friedkin and Blatty. Just yeah. Well, there you go. That's The Exorcist 1 and 3 in memory of William Friedkin.
Yeah,
what a guy.
Yeah.
What a horrible man, but in the best way.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're back to regular themes next week. We've done a little spin of the old wheel.
Yeah.
And what have we got? We've got lycanthropes.
Yep.
That's right, isn't it?
Lycanthropes.
Yeah. Lycanthrope. I was thinking lycanthrope, but no, lycanthrope is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lycanthropes. We've got werewolves.
Werewolves.
Got plenty to choose from.
Yeah.
I had a bit of trouble choosing. Sometimes I struggle to find something, but here I was like, oh, I'm
can't narrow it down.
For choice, yeah. What did you go for?
So, you know, I like to pick my films that I've not seen before.
Yeah.
I'm going for one that is definitely very well regarded, but it's not necessarily considered a classic because it's fairly modern.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Ginger Snaps.
Oh, you beauty. That was my backup.
Was that your backup?
I couldn't. So there was 2 films, and that was one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool.
Yeah, I've not seen it before.
Neither have I.
It's very well regarded as this kind of werewolves and lycanthropy as a metaphor for coming of age. It's
gothy high school horror. It's pretty grungy,
very female driven. You've got 2
yeah.
female main characters, which is really cool.
Is it Winona Ryder?
No, it's Catherine Isabel and somebody else. I can't remember the name of the other actress that plays the main character or the other main character, but it's Catherine Isabel who is.
I like Catherine Isabel.
Various things.
She's the one that was in like American Mary.
American
Hannibal,
Mary,
right?
Yeah. Freddy versus Jason.
Oh, didn't know that.
She's in Freddy versus Jason.
Okay.
She's been in various things. She's good.
I like her.
Catherine
Yeah, I like
Isabel.
her a lot. Cool. Ginger Snaps. I'm excited because
Cool.
that means I get to watch both the films that I had picked.
Great.
The other film. So that was if I wanted to go for one that I hadn't seen before, but I decided because it's werewolves, I need to go with one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, here we go. I knew you were going to pick this.
Dog Soldiers.
There it is.
Do you not like Dog Soldiers? I can't remember.
It's not that I don't like it. I don't love it.
Okay.
But then again, maybe I'll feel differently watching it a second time.
Okay. See, I absolutely adore Dog Soldiers.
Yeah.
It's just such an enjoyable film. Absolutely love it. So any excuse to watch it again. It's been a few years, so
yeah,
there we go.
Cool.
Dog Soldiers and Ginger Snaps.
That's a good combo.
That's a pretty good combo.
Good werewolf combo.
Bit of a modern combo as well.
Yeah. Ginger Snaps was late 90s, maybe 2000.
Yeah, I think it was 99, and Dog Soldiers was like 2004, 2005,
something like that.
Whereas the last few episodes we've been kind of on
we've been going for older
films.
I almost went for something very old because when I wrote this theme down, I specifically said lycanthropes rather than werewolves.
Okay.
Because I thought we could potentially go a little bit out of the box and go for like a were creature that isn't a wolf? Because obviously werewolves is the most... I don't know if it would still be called a lycanthrope if it's not a werewolf. If it's a for example, a were-cat. I was very tempted to go back and do cat people. Original cat people from the 40s.
We'll find some weird theme where you can do cat people.
We'll get them. Or watch the remake of Cat People from the early 80s. With Malcolm McDowell.
Malcolm McDowell in the Cat People?
Malcolm McDowell and Cat People. Or whatever. There you go. Actually, I was quite tempted. If I was going to pick a film that I had seen before, I was tempted to pick American Werewolf in London.
I thought you would.
Because that's one of my
favorite
films.
One of your favorites, yeah.
I love American Werewolf in London. Yeah. I think it's an absolutely fucking cracking film.
Yeah.
It's a great one. There you go. There's so many werewolves that you could do.
There is. And honestly, there's a lot of crossover with other themes as well.
There is.
So I'm sure we'll get a chance to.
Could have gone for a really bad one. I was kind of tempted to pick... There's a film called Howl that came out quite recently that's also got Sean Pertwee in it.
Oh, really?
So it would have made a fun crossover with
Dog Soldiers,
but it's set on a train. And it's like Sean Pertwee's like a train conductor. It's like modern day. It came out like 5 years ago.
I have not heard of this.
It's like a train going through England. It's supposedly not very good.
That doesn't surprise me.
From what I've seen in the synopsis, it sounds like a bit of generic schlock. But it's basically dog soldiers on a train, which sounds kind of funny.
I might watch this outside of the podcast.
I was actually a little... Actually, the reason I know about it is because I was tempted to pick that for our vehicles episode.
Oh, vehicles, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the other one I had in mind was Van Helsing.
Oh, man. I love Van Helsing.
But I thought werewolves are quite a small part of the film.
Yeah, they're not that.
And also, it's...
In it. There are so many things.
Would you say it's a horror film?
I would, yeah.
Would you? Okay.
Yeah. It's definitely a kind
more of an action.
Yeah, I mean, it's an action horror. It's one of those very accessible, kind of family-friendly horrors.
Yeah.
Like Stephen Sommers, so just like The Mummy.
The Mummy as well.
Very similar to The Mummy in tone. Yeah.
I'll find another reason to
watch Van Helsing. Man, I love Van Helsing. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we got Dog Soldiers and Ginger Snaps on the topic of lycanthropes for next week. This week we had William Friedkin / The Exorcist.
Yep.
To honor his memory. And that's us.
Yeah.
That's us for this week.
This was probably then our highest rated double bill so far.
Yeah.
I would need to have a look at it, but like we've not had many double bills that have where both films have scored highly from both of us.
That's true, actually, because even when you look at something like The Fog, where we both gave the original 5s.
Yeah. We both gave the remake a half star each.
So it would have dragged it right down. Maybe.
So this probably is, because I mean, that's what you 5 and a 3.5.
So
that's an 8. And then I gave it a 4.5 and a 4.5. So that's 9.
9.5.
So you're talking 17 out of 20.
Yeah.
Which is...
If it's not the highest, it's got to be pretty close.
Probably the highest rated double bill we've had so far.
Yeah. There you go.
It's going to be hard to beat.
Deservedly so.
I think so.
Deservedly so. Right. Well, rest in peace, William Friedkin. You've given us much joy and will continue to do so over the years. The rest of you, thank you for joining. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.